Welcome to my Catwalk C2 core assembly walkthrough. Before you start putting anything together, it's a good idea to charge all the sensors. First, the directional sensor and both the left and right shoe sensors. If you are coming from the original Catwalk C2 like I am, your first instinct might be to plug the charging cable into the bottom receiver that used to work on the older C2 models. On the C2 core, this won't work because the power adapter for the bottom receiver is no longer included. So instead, you will need to connect the sensor charging cable directly to USB port on your PC or another powered USB source. While the sensors are charging, you can check the status using the LED indicators. On the shoe sensors, the LED flashes during charging. The directional inner sensor uses a different behavior. The LED slowly dims instead. Next, you need to connect the bottom receiver to your PC and check whether it's properly recognized. If the device is detected correctly, it means the unit is fully functional and ready to use. A faulty unit would usually fail at this step. It might not appear at all in the system under Bluetooth and other devices, and the CAT gateway software would also have trouble detecting it. Without this detection, the Treadmill simply wouldn't be usable. To verify this, make sure you have the CAT gateway software downloaded and installed from the official Catwalk website. Inside CAT gateway, your purchased C2 core should appear, and from there you can start pairing the individual sensors with your Catwalk C core unit, which is exactly what I am showing here. One more important note about pairing the sensors. At first, I tried pairing them using a USB 2.0 extension cable connected to PC, but that didn't work reliably. Because of that, I recommend pairing the sensors using the short half-meter micro USB cable plugged directly into the PC without any extension cable in between. An extension cable worked fine for me on the older Catwalk C2, but with the C2 core enhanced, it no longer does. The only exception might be a USB 3.0 extension cable, specifically the one that included with the C2 core as part of the accessory bundle. Next, we take the directional inner sensor and mount it into the top shell plastic cover using two small thin screws and a Phillips screwdriver. Once it's secured, the power cable with the connector is plugged back in so the sensor can continue charging while we move on with the assembly. Personally, I recommend attaching the waist harness to the double row support rod at this stage. It's simply more comfortable to do this while everything is still in a horizontal position on the ground. For this step, you'll need 4 small screws and the S wrench. After that, it's also a good idea to check the 4 nuts on the back side of the waist harness and tighten them using the S open and wrench. In my case, they are already firmly tightened from the factory, so I am not going to adjust them further here. Now we attach the front top shell with the inner sensor already mounted to the upper part of the double row support rod. To secure it in place, you will need 4 small screws, 2 on each side of the double row support rod. The screws are tightened using a screwdriver. Next, we continue by attaching the back top shell from the opposite side. Once again, you will need 4 screws and the screwdriver to secure it in place. Next, I move on to attaching another plastic cover, the back middle shell. For this step, you will again need 4 S-type thin screw and screwdriver. At this point, I missed the step where the front middle shell should be also installed. You can definitely attach it here as well. I'll come back and install it a bit later in the process. Now we move on to mounting the two arc support rods. For each lower mount, prepare 4 M screws for washers and the L wrench. Make sure the slightly chamfered edge of the arc support rod is facing upward. The bottom side is not chamfered. The washers are important because they allow the screws to be tightened more securely. These 8 lower screws are the ones most likely to loosen over time during use, so it's a good idea to check and retighten them periodically. For now, don't fully tighten them yet. We'll finalize the tightening after the upper end of the arc support rods are connected and the structure is aligned. Now we take the two connecting plates which act as a bridge connecting both sides of the arc support rods. As you can see in my video, if the lower screws are not loosened, attaching these connecting plates becomes significantly more difficult because the arc support rods create much stronger resistance when trying to align and connect them with the plates. For this step we will need 4 long L screws and 4 L nuts. As you will quickly notice, the manufacturer saved a bit here by using fairly thin nuts, which makes them hard to tighten because they have a small contact surface. You'll need to first insert one screw through the left arc support rod and then manage to insert the second screw through the opposite right arc support rod and secure them with the nut. The remaining 2 screws, including the nuts, are significantly easier to insert after that. I recommend doing the final tightening only after the next step, which I realized later. So unlike what I did here, don't fully tighten them at this point, otherwise you will be just creating extra work for yourself. At this point we take the fully prepared double row support rod, in my case already with the waist harness attached, and place it into the connecting bridge formed by the 2 connecting plates between the arc support rods. We then use the remaining 4 long L screw and 4 L nuts to secure it in place. I recommend holding the double row support rod firmly during this step because until it's secured with at least 1 L screw, it can easily wobble from side to side. Just like in the previous step, all 4 L screws need to be inserted and secured with the 4 L nuts, but they should not be fully tightened yet. Now we get to what was probably the biggest surprise for me during the entire installation process, something that later cost me a lot of extra work and also explains why I don't recommend fully tightened the L nuts until the very end of the assembly. As you can probably see in the video, the double row support rod doesn't appear to be perfectly straight, but instead slightly tilted to one side. This caused a number of problems for me and led to some disappointment because this is a major drawback of the C2 core compared to the standard cut Volk C2, where this issue simply doesn't exist and the top element can't be mounted crooked. With the C2 core, you either need to carefully align everything using the markings shown in the manual and adjust the connecting plates so that the double row support rod ends up perfectly level, which is quite difficult to do, or use another method. I personally use a spirit level and adjust everything multiple times until I was satisfied with the result. Once everything was properly aligned, I performed the final tightening of all 8 L nuts so the structure would hold firmly and no longer tend to tilt to one side. However, as becomes obvious during regular use, these nuts will likely loosen over time, which significantly hurts this model. At this point, I can say that it probably worth paying extra for the standard C2 model, where this issue simply doesn't need to be dealt with at all. Once we are satisfied with the position of the upper part of the double row support rod, it's time to cover the connecting screws in the center section using the plastic middle shells from both sides. For this step, we'll need the S thin screws and a screwdriver. Of course, if you want to keep access to these center connection screws, it's better to leave this step out for now. Personally, I prefer not to waste time repeatedly installing and removing parts when I need to adjust the position of the catwalk core. Because I forgot to attach one of the middle shell 1 part earlier, I'm installing it at this point. In practice, however, the order in which these shell parts are installed doesn't really matter since they don't have any significant impact on the actual functionality of the catwalk C2 core. Since I have now finished assembling the top part of the catwalk, we can move on to installing the stabilizing feet. I recommend doing this only at a point where you no longer need to tilt the catwalk C structure, for example, when you don't need further access to the bottom receiver for connecting anything or checking its status. Compared to the standard C2 model, attaching and removing the stabilizing feet here is actually very quick and easy. In this regard, I have to say I was more satisfied with this solution. To mount the stabilizing feet, we need 8M screws and the L wrench. If you plan to run frequently or change direction quickly during gameplay, I strongly recommend not using the treadmill without these stabilizing feet installed. Otherwise, there is a real risk of tipping the entire treadmill over and causing a serious injury. This step is optional and only really relevant for users with wired VR headsets. Personally, I'm already using a much better solution, also it is of course also more expensive. As a basic option, however, the package includes an HMD wire pulley system which you can attach to the ceiling and the wall and route your headset cable through. Personally, I would still recommend a system with multiple attachment points. If you connected the sensors to the power cable at the beginning of the assembly and the LEDs indicated charging with flashing on the shoe sensors and dimming on the inner sensor, you should now be close to having all connected sensors fully charged. In my case, all 3 sensors were almost completely discharged at the start, so otherwise I would have had to wait up to another hour for them to reach a full charge. The shoe sensors must be installed correctly. The right sensor marked with the letter next to the LED goes into the right shoe and the L sensor goes into the left shoe. When you hold both shoes the same way I do in the video, the easiest check is that both sensors should be positioned on the inner sides closer to the center. If the LEDs are facing outward toward the edges, the sensors need to be swapped. Removing and reinstalling the sensors is very simple. All you need is flathead screwdriver as shown in the video. The sensors must always be installed with the LEDs and charging connectors facing outward, otherwise they will not function properly. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you next time.